Maya Chen had always been fascinated by her grandmother's old travel journals, but she never expected to find a hand-drawn map tucked between the yellowed pages of the 1952 expedition diary. The map showed a series of caves deep in the Amazon, rainforest marked with strange symbols that seemed to pulse with meaning, even though Maya couldn't understand them. Her grandmother, Elena, had been a renowned archaeologist who disappeared during her final expedition 30 years ago, leaving behind only cryptic notes about the breath of ancient spirits and guardians who never sleep. Now 28 and working as a museum curator in San Francisco, Maya felt her mundane life slip away as she traced the faded ink lines with her finger. The map depicted a location roughly 200 miles southeast of Manaus, Brazil, in an area that most modern maps showed as unexplored territory. What struck her most were the detailed sketches of carved stone faces along the margins, their expressions seeming to shift in the lamplight of her apartment. The decision came suddenly, like lightning splitting a dark sky. Maya called her best friend Jake Morrison, an adventure photographer who had been trying to convince her for years to join one of his expeditions. Jake's enthusiasm was infectious when she described the discovery, and within hours they were planning their journey to Brazil. They would need a local guide, proper equipment, and most importantly, they would need to keep their destination secret. 3 days later, Maya stood in the humid air of Manaus, clutching her grandmother's journal, while Jake negotiated with Carlos Mendoza, a weather-beaten river guide whose reputation for navigating dangerous waters was matched only by his knowledge of indigenous legends. Carlos studied the map with increasing concern, his scarred hands trembling slightly as he recognized certain landmarks. He spoke of local warnings about the area, tales passed down through generations about travelers who entered certain caves, and emerged changed if they emerged at all. Despite Carlos's obvious reluctance, the promise of substantial payment and Maya's determination eventually swayed him. As they loaded their boat with supplies, camping equipment, and communication devices, Maya noticed how other guides and locals watched them with mixtures of curiosity and worry. An elderly woman selling fruit at the dock grabbed Maya's arm and whispered urgently in broken English about the sleeping ones and doors that should stay closed. But Maya politely dismissed the warning as local superstition. The boat cut through the muddy waters of the Amazon as they began their journey into the unknown. Maya spent the trip studying her grandmother's notes, discovering references to an ancient civilization that supposedly mastered the art of preserving consciousness beyond death. Elena had written about vessels of memory and the price of eternal knowledge, phrases that sent chills down Maya's spine. Jake documented their journey with his camera, but even his usual optimism seemed tempered by the oppressive atmosphere of the deep jungle. As the sun set on their first day of travel, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Maya felt a strange sensation, as if unseen eyes were watching their progress. The jungle sounds seemed different here, more organized, almost like a language she couldn't quite understand. Carlos muttered prayers under his breath and kept checking his compass with growing agitation. When Maya asked him about his concerns, he simply pointed to the darkening canopy ahead and said, "Some places remember everything that happens to them, señorita, and some memories are better left sleeping." That night, as they made camp on a small island in the river, Maya dreamed of stone corridors filled with whispered conversations in languages that predated human speech. She woke to find strange symbols drawn in the sand around their camp, symbols that matched those on her grandmother's map. Carlos was already awake, staring at the markings with fear evident in his eyes. Jake tried to rationalize the symbols as the work of local wildlife or natural formations, but Maya knew they were standing at the threshold of something far beyond their understanding. The second day brought them deeper into uncharted territory, where the river narrowed and the jungle pressed in on both sides like living walls. Ancient trees towered overhead, their branches forming a canopy so thick that only scattered beams of sunlight reached the water's surface. Maya felt her grandmother's presence more strongly here, as if Elena's spirit was guiding them toward a destiny that had been set in motion decades earlier. The adventure that had begun as a personal quest for answers was transforming into something far more significant, and Maya realized that finding her grandmother's final expedition site might be only the beginning of a journey that would change everything she believed about life, death, and the mysteries hidden in the world's most remote places. On the third morning of their journey, Maya woke to an eerie silence that made her skin crawl. The usual symphony of jungle sounds had vanished, replaced by an unnatural quiet that seemed to press against her eardrums. Carlos was already packing their supplies with urgent, jerky movements, his face pale beneath his sun-weathered skin. He explained in hurried Spanish that they had entered what the local tribes called the listening forest, where even the animals knew to remain silent. The river had become increasingly narrow and shallow, forcing them to abandon their boat and continue on foot. Jake strapped his photography equipment to his back while Maya secured her grandmother's journal in a waterproof pouch close to her heart. Carlos led them along what appeared to be an ancient path, though it was so overgrown that Maya wondered how he could distinguish it from the surrounding jungle. Every step took them deeper into a green cathedral where massive trees formed living pillars and vines hung like ancient curtains. As they walked, Maya began to notice strange details that didn't belong in a natural environment. Stones arranged in perfect geometric patterns lay half-buried beneath centuries of fallen leaves. Trees grew in unnaturally straight lines, as if planted according to some forgotten design. Most unsettling were the carvings they occasionally glimpsed on tree trunks and rock faces, symbols that matched those in her grandmother's journal, but seemed to have been carved by hands that understood the secret language of the forest itself. By midday, they reached a clearing dominated by a massive cecropia tree, whose trunk was easily 20 feet in diameter. Carlos stopped abruptly, pointing to a series of carved stones arranged in a circle around the tree's base. The stones were covered with the same mysterious symbols, but these carvings seemed fresh, as if someone had been maintaining them regularly. Maya felt a chill of recognition as she compared the arrangement to a sketch in her grandmother's journal, dated just 1 week before Elena's disappearance. Jake began photographing the stone circle, but his camera started malfunctioning in ways that defied explanation. Images appeared distorted, showing figures and shapes that weren't visible to the naked eye. In one photograph, Maya saw what looked like her grandmother's face reflected in the surface of a stone, but when she looked directly at the stone, she saw only weathered rock. Carlos backed away from the circle, muttering about portals and guardians, his usual composure completely shattered. That evening, as they set up camp at what Carlos insisted was a safe distance from the stone circle, Maya made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in a secret compartment of her grandmother's journal was a second map, this one showing the interior layout of cave systems that supposedly lay beneath the clearing they had just discovered. Elena's handwriting filled the margins with increasingly frantic notes about the watchers in the walls and memories that bleed through time. The second map revealed that the stone circle was merely the entrance to an underground complex that stretched for miles beneath the jungle floor. Elena's notes described chambers filled with crystalline formations that preserved the consciousness of an ancient civilization, beings who had learned to transcend death by storing their minds in living stone. According to the journal, these entities still existed in some form, waiting for the right conditions to awaken and reclaim their world. As Maya shared these revelations with Jake and Carlos around their campfire, strange lights began to appear in the jungle around them. The lights moved with purpose, circling their camp in patterns that seemed almost ritualistic. Carlos grabbed his machete and began chanting prayers in what sounded like a mixture of Spanish and indigenous languages. Jake tried to document the phenomena with his camera, but the light seemed to avoid being photographed, always moving just beyond the range of his lens. The lights drew closer throughout the night, and Maya began to hear whispers in the darkness, voices speaking in the same ancient language she had dreamed about during their river journey. The whispers seemed to be calling her name, but not the name she had been given at birth. They called her by a name she had never heard before but somehow recognized, a name that felt like it belonged to someone she might have been in another life. When dawn finally broke, the lights vanished as suddenly as they had appeared, but they left behind evidence of their presence that chilled Maya to the bone. Around their camp, the ground was covered with footprints that didn't match any known animal or human pattern. The prints seemed to be made by feet that were partially solid and partially something else entirely, leaving impressions that faded even as they watched. Carlos announced his intention to abandon the expedition and return to Manaus immediately. He had seen enough, he said, to know that they were dealing with forces beyond human understanding. But Maya felt drawn to the stone circle with an intensity that surprised her. Her grandmother's journal had become warm to the touch, and certain pages now glowed with a faint luminescence that hadn't been there before. She knew that whatever lay beneath the clearing held the answers she had been searching for, answers that might explain not only her grandmother's disappearance, but also the strange dreams and visions that had plagued Maya throughout her entire life. As she stood at the edge of their camp, looking back toward the stone circle, Maya made the decision that would seal their fate. She would continue the expedition with or without her companions, because something deep in her soul recognized this place as her true destination. The adventure had become a calling, and Maya was finally ready to answer it no matter what the cost might be. Despite Carlos's fears and warnings, Jake refused to let Maya continue alone, and their guide, bound by a mixture of professional duty and genuine concern, reluctantly agreed to stay for one more day. As they approached the stone circle in the morning light, Maya felt the journal in her hands growing warmer, and she noticed that some of the symbols carved into the stones were beginning to glow with the same soft luminescence she had seen in her grandmother's notes. When Maya placed her hand on the central stone, following instructions she found in Elena's journal, the ground beneath their feet began to vibrate with a low, rhythmic pulse that seemed to emanate from deep within the earth. The massive cecropia tree responded to the vibrations by slowly rotating its trunk, revealing a hidden opening that had been concealed behind its bark for centuries. The opening was perfectly circular, lined with the same carved stones that formed the circle, and it descended into darkness that seemed to absorb their flashlight beams. Carlos crossed himself repeatedly and began backing away from the opening, but Jake was already examining the carved symbols that lined the entrance tunnel. The symbols appeared to be a form of ancient writing that combined mathematical equations with artistic representations of human consciousness. Maya recognized some of the patterns from her grandmother's sketches, but seeing them carved in stone with such precision and purpose made her realize that Elena had only discovered a fraction of what lay hidden beneath the jungle floor. The descent into the tunnel system was unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. The walls were carved from living rock, but they seemed to pulse with their own internal light, creating an environment that felt more like the inside of a vast organism than a traditional cave system. The air was surprisingly fresh and carried scents that reminded Maya of ocean breezes and mountain meadows, impossible fragrances in the depths of the Amazon jungle. As they moved deeper underground, they began to encounter chambers filled with crystalline formations that defied geological explanation. The crystals grew in perfect geometric patterns and seemed to respond to their presence by glowing more brightly as they approached. Jake's camera began working perfectly again in this environment, but the images it captured showed details that weren't visible to their naked eyes. In the photographs, they could see shadowy figures moving within the crystal formations, beings that appeared to be watching their every movement. Maya's grandmother's journal became increasingly warm as they progressed through the tunnels, and certain pages began revealing text that hadn't been visible before. Elena's hidden writings described encounters with entities she called the Preserved Ones, ancient beings who had learned to store their consciousness in crystalline matrices when their physical civilization faced extinction thousands of years ago. According to Elena's notes, these entities weren't merely ghosts or spirits, but fully conscious beings who existed in a state between life and death, waiting for the right conditions to return to physical form. In the deepest chamber they had yet discovered, Maya found evidence of her grandmother's final campsite. Elena's equipment lay exactly where she had left it 30 years ago, perfectly preserved by the strange atmosphere of the underground complex. Most importantly, Maya discovered Elena's final journal entry, written in handwriting that became increasingly shaky and urgent as the pages progressed. Elena's last entry described her discovery that the Preserved Ones weren't just waiting passively for resurrection. They had been actively influencing events in the outside world for centuries, drawing specific individuals to their underground sanctuary when the time was right for their return. Elena had realized that she hadn't discovered the site by accident, but had been guided there by entities who recognized something in her bloodline that made her suitable for their purposes. The final revelation in Elena's journal was the most shocking of all. The preserved ones needed living hosts to complete their resurrection, and they had been cultivating certain family lines for generations to produce individuals with the right genetic and spiritual characteristics. Elena had been chosen not as an explorer or archaeologist, but as a vessel for one of the most powerful entities in their civilization. Her disappearance hadn't been death, but transformation into something that was neither fully human nor fully alien. As Maya read these words by the light of her flashlight, the crystals around them began to pulse more rapidly, and she heard her grandmother's voice calling to her from deeper within the chamber complex. Elena's voice sounded exactly as Maya remembered it from childhood, warm and loving. But there was something else beneath the familiar tones, something that made Maya's skin crawl with recognition and terror. Jake grabbed Maya's arm and pointed to his camera display, where dozens of shadowy figures were now visible within the crystal formations, all of them turning to look directly at the camera lens. Carlos had fallen to his knees and was praying in a mixture of languages, his words echoing strangely in the crystalline environment. The temperature in the chamber was dropping rapidly, and their breath began to form clouds in the increasingly cold air. Maya realized that by entering the chamber system and activating the stone circle above, they had triggered some kind of awakening, process that had been dormant for 3 decades. The preserved ones were stirring from their long sleep, and her presence had provided the catalyst they needed to begin their return to the physical world. The adventure that had begun as a quest to find her missing grandmother had become a race against time to prevent an ancient civilization from reclaiming a world they had abandoned millennia ago. As Elena's voice grew stronger and closer, calling Maya deeper into the crystal chambers, Maya faced the most difficult decision of her life. She could follow her grandmother's voice and potentially reunite with the woman who had raised her, but doing so might mean sacrificing her own humanity and helping to unleash forces that could change the world forever. Alternatively, she could try to escape with Jake and Carlos, but leaving might mean abandoning Elena to an eternity trapped between life and death in the crystalline prison of the preserved ones. Maya's decision was made for her when the chamber floor began to shift and move beneath their feet, revealing a spiral staircase that descended even deeper into the earth. Elena's voice grew more insistent, no longer calling Maya by name but speaking in that ancient language Maya had been hearing in her dreams. As the words washed over her, Maya found herself understanding their meaning with a clarity that terrified her. Elena was explaining the true nature of their family's connection to this place, a bond that stretched back through generations of women who had been chosen as guardians of the preserved ones. Jake tried to pull Maya away from the newly revealed staircase, but she found herself walking toward it as if in a trance. The journal in her hands had become almost too hot to touch, and pages were turning by themselves, revealing more of Elena's hidden writings about the selection process and the rituals required for the awakening ceremony. Carlos had stopped praying and was staring at Maya with a mixture of fear and recognition, as if he was seeing someone else looking out through her eyes. The descent down the spiral staircase felt like falling through layers of time itself. The walls here were covered with murals that depicted the history of the preserved ones, showing their advanced civilization at its peak and their desperate decision to abandon physical form when faced with a catastrophe that Maya couldn't quite comprehend from the ancient artwork. The beings in the murals looked almost human, but there were subtle differences in their proportions and features that suggested they were something else entirely. At the bottom of the staircase, they entered a vast chamber that took Maya's breath away. The ceiling stretched so high above them that their flashlight beams couldn't reach it, and the walls were lined with thousands upon thousands of crystal formations, each one containing the preserved consciousness of an individual from the ancient civilization. The crystals pulsed in rhythmic patterns, creating a symphony of light that seemed to communicate complex emotions and memories directly to Maya's mind. In the center of the chamber stood a figure that Maya recognized immediately, though 30 Years had passed since she had last seen her grandmother. Elena appeared exactly as Maya remembered her, but her skin had taken on a translucent quality that allowed the crystal formations behind her to show through like veins of light. She moved with fluid grace that seemed unaffected by gravity, and, when she spoke, her words seemed to come from the crystal formations themselves rather than from her lips. Elena explained that the transformation process wasn't death but evolution, a joining of human consciousness with the collective wisdom of the preserved ones. She had volunteered for the procedure after realizing that it was the only way to prevent the ancient beings from taking what they needed by force. For 30 years she had existed in a state of expanded consciousness, learning secrets about the nature of reality that human minds weren't normally capable of understanding. The reunion Maya had dreamed of became a nightmare as Elena revealed the true purpose behind Maya's journey to this place. The preserved ones needed a new generation of hybrid beings to serve as bridges between their crystalline existence and the physical world above. Maya's bloodline had been carefully cultivated over centuries to produce someone with the right combination of genetic markers and spiritual sensitivity to undergo the transformation process and survive with her essential humanity intact. Jake and Carlos tried to convince Maya to leave with them immediately, but she found herself drawn to the crystal formations like a moth to flame. As she approached the nearest cluster of preserving crystals, images began flowing directly into her mind, showing her glimpses of the vast knowledge and power that awaited her if she chose to join the collective consciousness. She saw technologies that could heal the Earth's environmental damage, scientific breakthroughs that could eliminate disease and poverty, and artistic expressions that transcended anything the human imagination had ever conceived. But she also saw the price of such knowledge. The transformation process would fundamentally change who she was, merging her individual consciousness with thousands of alien minds and leaving behind only a shadow of her human identity. She would gain immortality and unimaginable wisdom, but she would lose the ability to form genuine human relationships or experience emotions the way she had throughout her life. Elena approached Maya with arms outstretched, her translucent features radiating love and understanding. She promised that the transformation wasn't painful and that Maya would still be herself, only better, more complete, capable of accessing realms of experience that no purely human consciousness could ever achieve. The other preserved ones began emerging from their crystal matrices, appearing as ghostly figures that surrounded Maya with gentle touches and whispered promises of eternal knowledge and purpose. As the ancient beings reached out to embrace her, Maya felt her individual will beginning to dissolve into their collective consciousness. The process was seductive and peaceful, like sinking into warm water that promised to wash away all her fears and uncertainties. She could feel her grandmother's love surrounding her, but she could also sense something else beneath Elena's familiar presence, something vast and alien that had been using Elena's memories and emotions as a mask to hide its true nature. The realization that her grandmother had become a puppet for entities that didn't truly understand human love or individuality gave Maya the strength to resist their influence. She pulled away from the reaching hands of the preserved ones and stumbled backward toward Jake and Carlos, who were shouting her name and trying to break through the trance-like state that had been overtaking her. Elena's expression changed from loving invitation to something like disappointment mixed with ancient hunger. The other preserved ones began moving more aggressively, their ghostly forms becoming more solid and threatening as they realized that Maya was rejecting their offer of transformation. The crystal formations around the chamber began pulsing with angry red light, and the temperature dropped so rapidly that ice crystals began forming in the air around them. Maya grabbed Jake's hand and Carlos's arm, shouting for them to run back toward the spiral staircase. As they fled through the chamber, the preserved ones pursued them with increasing determination, their forms shifting between ghostly transparency and solid physicality as they struggled to maintain their grip on the physical world without a willing human host to anchor their consciousness. The adventure that had promised answers and reunion had become a desperate race for survival against beings whose alien nature had been hidden behind familiar faces and loving promises. The escape from the chamber became a nightmare pursuit through tunnels that seemed to shift and change their configuration, as the preserved ones manipulated the crystalline structure of their underground domain. Maya led Jake and Carlos through passages that had been straight and simple during their descent, but now twisted into impossible geometries that defied the laws of physics. The walls pulsed with angry energy, and the air itself seemed to resist their movement, growing thick and viscous as if trying to trap them in place. Behind them, Elena's voice echoed through the tunnels, no longer warm and loving but filled with the collective frustration of thousands of ancient beings who had been denied their chance at resurrection. She called to Maya in multiple languages, some human and others that predated human speech, promising forgiveness if Maya would return voluntarily, and threatening consequences that would extend far beyond the underground complex if she continued to resist their will. Jake's camera had become their most valuable tool for navigation, as it somehow captured the true layout of the tunnels, while their naked eyes saw only the illusions created by the preserved ones. By following the paths shown in his photographs, they managed to avoid several dead ends and trap passages that appeared to be exits but actually led deeper into the domain of the ancient beings. Carlos proved invaluable as well, using survival instincts honed by decades in the jungle to identify which passages felt genuinely connected to the surface world. As they climbed toward the chamber where they had first entered the underground complex, Maya began to feel a burning sensation from her grandmother's journal. When she opened it to investigate, she discovered that new text was appearing on previously blank pages, written in Elena's handwriting, but filled with warnings about the true nature of the preserved ones. The real Elena's consciousness was apparently still fighting for control within the collective entity, and she was using the last of her individual will to help Maya escape. Elena's ghostly messages revealed that the preserved ones weren't the benevolent guardians of ancient wisdom they pretended to be, but survivors of a civilization that had destroyed itself through their pursuit of immortality at any cost. They had consumed the consciousness of their entire species in their quest to preserve themselves, and they viewed humanity as nothing more than a convenient source of fresh minds to fuel their continued existence. The transformation they offered wasn't evolution, but spiritual cannibalism disguised as enlightenment. The burning journal also provided Maya with crucial information about how to seal the underground complex and prevent the preserved ones from extending their influence into the surface world. Elena had discovered during her 30 years of imprisonment that the stone circle above ground served as more than just an entrance. It was also a containment system that could be activated to trap the ancient beings in their crystalline prison permanently. When they finally reached the chamber with the opening that led back to the surface, Maya found herself faced with the most difficult decision of the entire ordeal. According to Elena's instructions, sealing the complex would require someone to remain behind to activate the containment system from the inside, effectively sacrificing themselves to ensure that the preserved ones could never again attempt to influence the outside world. Jake immediately volunteered to stay behind, arguing that as a photographer he had already documented enough of their discovery to warn others about the danger. But Maya knew that the containment ritual required someone with the specific genetic markers that had made her a target for the ancient beings in the first place. Only someone from her bloodline could access the crystalline control systems that governed the prison's locks and seals. As the three of them stood in the chamber arguing about who would make the sacrifice, Elena's ghostly form appeared one final time, no longer controlled by the collective consciousness of the preserved ones, but speaking with her own voice and personality. She explained that she had been fighting for decades to maintain enough individual identity to help Maya when the time came, and that she could complete the sealing ritual herself if Maya could provide her with enough emotional anchor to remain independent of the collective consciousness for just a few more minutes. The emotional farewell between Maya and her grandmother was heartbreaking, but also healing. As Elena finally had the chance to explain her choices and express her love without the influence of the alien entities that had been using her as a puppet, she told Maya to live her life fully and never to return to this place, no matter what dreams or visions might try to draw her back. The preserved ones would eventually find other ways to extend their influence, but for now, humanity would be safe from their direct manipulation. Elena's sacrifice activated ancient mechanisms that began sealing the tunnels and chambers throughout the complex. The crystal formations that had housed the consciousness of the preserved ones began going dark one by one, and the temperature in the chamber returned to normal as the alien influence withdrew from the immediate area. The opening to the surface began to contract, forcing Maya, Jake, and Carlos to climb quickly toward the daylight they could see far above. As they emerged from the stone circle into the jungle clearing, the ground beneath the massive cecropia tree collapsed, sealing the entrance permanently and leaving only a depression in the earth where the ancient prison had been hidden for millennia. The carved stones of the circle crumbled to dust, and the mysterious symbols that had guided Maya on her journey faded from her grandmother's journal, leaving behind only Elena's original expedition notes and the memories of an adventure that had changed everything Maya thought she knew about life, death, and the hidden dangers that lay sleeping beneath the surface of the world. The three survivors stood in the clearing for a long moment, processing what they had experienced and lost. Maya felt a profound sense of closure regarding her grandmother's disappearance, but she also carried the weight of knowledge about threats that still existed in other locations around the world. Elena's final warnings had suggested that the Amazon complex was only one of several sites where the preserved ones had established their influence, and Maya realized that her adventure was ending just as her true responsibility was beginning. The journey back to Manaus passed in contemplative silence, each of the three survivors processing their experience in different ways. Carlos had withdrawn into himself, occasionally muttering prayers and making protective gestures that seemed to help him cope with what he had witnessed. Jake spent hours reviewing the photographs he had taken throughout their expedition, marveling at how his camera had captured details and entities that remained invisible to normal sight. Maya found herself studying her grandmother's journal, which had returned to its original state but now felt warm with Elena's loving presence rather than the alien influence that had previously controlled it. When they reached civilization, they faced the challenge of deciding what to share about their discovery. Jake's photographs provided undeniable evidence of their encounter with the supernatural, but they all understood that releasing such information to the public could potentially lead others to seek out similar sites around the world. After long discussions, they agreed to keep the specific location secret while documenting their experience as a warning for future generations who might stumble upon similar ancient dangers. Maya returned to San Francisco profoundly changed by her experience. Her work at the museum took on new meaning as she began researching other archaeological sites that showed similar patterns to what she had discovered in the Amazon. Using Elena's journal as a guide, she identified several locations around the world where ancient civilizations had disappeared suddenly and completely, leaving behind only mysterious stone formations and local legends about sleeping spirits, or guardians who never died. The knowledge that the preserved ones existed in multiple locations created a heavy burden of responsibility for Maya. She couldn't ignore the possibility that other sites might eventually attract explorers who lacked the specific bloodline markers that had allowed her to resist the ancient being's influence. She began developing a network of researchers and archaeologists who could monitor suspicious sites and warn potential visitors about the dangers that lay hidden beneath seemingly innocent archaeological discoveries. Jake's photographs from their expedition became the foundation for a private archive that documented supernatural phenomena around the world. His images of the crystal formations and ghostly entities provided visual evidence that helped Maya convince other researchers to take her warning seriously. Together, they established a foundation dedicated to identifying and protecting sites where ancient entities might pose threats to modern humanity, working quietly behind the scenes to prevent other families from experiencing the loss and trauma that had shaped Maya's life. Carlos became their primary guide for investigating sites in South America, his experience with the preserved ones having taught him to recognize the warning signs that indicated supernatural dangers. Despite his initial terror, he developed a deep respect for Maya's mission and proved invaluable in training other guides to recognize and avoid locations where ancient entities might be stirring from their long sleep. 6 months after their return from the Amazon, Maya received a package with no return address containing a small crystal fragment that pulsed with the same energy she remembered from the underground chamber. Along with the crystal was a note written in Elena's handwriting, explaining that while the immediate threat had been contained, The network of preserved ones was vast and patient, and that Maya's role as a guardian was just beginning. The crystal fragment served as both a warning system and a communication device, glowing brighter when Maya was near locations where the preserved ones had established their influence. Over the following years, it led her to sites in Tibet, Ireland, and the American Southwest, each one containing similar underground complexes filled with entities that had been waiting centuries or millennia for the right conditions to attempt their return to the physical world. Maya's life became a constant balance between her normal career and her secret mission to protect humanity from threats that most people could never imagine. She developed techniques for sealing compromised sites and learned to recognize individuals who might be susceptible to influence from the ancient entities. Each successful containment mission brought new challenges as the preserved ones adapted their strategies and began working more subtly to achieve their goals. The adventure that had begun with the discovery of a simple map in her grandmother's journal had transformed Maya into something she never expected to become, a guardian standing between humanity and forces that threatened the very nature of human consciousness. She learned to live with the knowledge that her bloodline carried both a gift and a curse, making her uniquely suited to resist the influence of the preserved ones, while also making her a perpetual target for their attention. Years later, as Maya continued her work, protecting ancient sites from those who would exploit them and protecting humanity from the entities that slumbered beneath the earth, she often thought about Elena's sacrifice and the choice that had saved not just Maya's life but potentially the future of human civilization itself. The crystal fragment that had once belonged to the Amazon complex served as a constant reminder that some adventures never truly end, but continue to shape the world in ways that remain invisible to most people. Maya's story became a testament to the idea that true courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to face impossible odds when the stakes are higher than personal safety or comfort. She had found her grandmother and lost her again, but in doing so, she had discovered her own purpose and the strength to carry on Elena's work in ways that neither of them could have imagined when the adventure first began with a mysterious map hidden in an old expedition journal.